Dr. Tay, relating to the sample of students, is there any particular reason you chose primary 3, 4, and 5 and not have primary 6 or the younger ones?
Well, it relates to the area of interest for me when looking at the clinical population. So we were really wanting to get some data from younger children, but they also needed to be children who could actually understand the questionnaires. So when they get to primary 1, we know that they have a certain capacity for reading and writing. However, schools were very reluctant for us to come into either the primary 1 or the primary 6 classrooms. So the primary 1, because many of these kids, I think they feel are still adjusting, which is fair. I should mention that many of the school administrators were concerned about how this would reflect on their school. So they didn't want, they did not want primary 1 children to be reflecting badly upon their school in any way, because they were having such an awful experience with separation and being put into elementary school for the first time. And then obviously the primary 6 students were off limits for a variety of reasons. They were from day 1 preparing for their PSLE, and so there was just no room in their schedules for us to come and collect data. That was what they said to us. So I'm not being facetious. One school actually said to us, no, they do not have time in their schedule for you to come. And the other piece, they said, well, if you're looking at quality of life, you can just assume that all the primary 6 kids are having a lot of stress, so their quality of life cannot be very good. Yeah, I know. It sounds humorous, but it also concerns me, because that's a whole year of a child's life, that they spend where everyone presumes that they're miserable, and oh well.
All right, Professor Frank Woon. Frank?
Susan, I was just interested. I'm Frank Woon. Along with Prof. Kwa and Mr. Wee, we've just spent 2 weeks helping some Dharma counselors, not so much with therapy as with sort of understanding themselves. I was just wondering whether I could just try and experiment with the audience, and then to see how you teach the young children that you have. You ready to try it with me? Okay. Now, what I'm going to say, I might differ from what you teach, Susan, but that's what I want to learn from you. You see, at the moment you're breathing, but you're not aware. So you're sort of from a state of non-awareness. I've brought you to a state of being aware that you are breathing. Now, you're using the outside of your chest wall, but you're also using a muscle called the diaphragm. If I asked you to just take a deep breath and just hold it for a little while, however long you want, I brought you to another state of attention. It may be different from what you're teaching, Susan, but all right. So we've gone from non-awareness to just a general awareness, which is sort of like 360 degrees, to sort of a focus, which is the attention. You're focusing on your diaphragm and not, say, on the chest wall and so on. I just want to bring you to 1 or 2 more, and then we'll see how Susan does.
Ibertone is right under you. This would be helpful to you.
No, I want you to use it. I said earlier with Susan, and she says she actually uses a vibratone for it, which I think is a beautiful way of doing it. I usually just use some Tibetan bells that my wife had bought for me. So that's got that secular thing now. It's fine. But I might use it in a moment, okay? All right. So we've gone from non-awareness to awareness to attention. Now, if I ask you to just take a deep breath, but maybe hold it for your own count of 3 or 4 or 5, you're welcome to do it either with your eyes closed or open. It's quite okay. Just hold it for whatever number you like. I brought you to perhaps a slightly higher level of intention. Again, I must stress, this is not the Buddhist way of intention. It's just a very much sort of an introduction into that. Now you're sort of telling yourself that you want to hold your breath for a little while. So you have that intention of holding your breath. This is actually, I think, what Susan was meaning with regard to executive function. Basically, if you put your eyes over your your hands like this. The part of the brain that's covered by your hands, that's roughly what we call the prefrontal cortex. That's where the things that we want to do, the executive function, what you want to plan to do, that's where it occurs. I just want to bring you up to one more, and then I'll stop and let Susan take over. Can I
Yes,
follow
yes.
what do I do?
Yes, just like this.
Now, the last one is, remember we've moved from non-awareness to awareness, to attention, to intention. The last bit is a little bit tricky. It's attention to intention. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to confuse you or anything. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to ring the bell, the vibratone once, and you take a deep breath in. Yes? Now, I want you to hold your breath and not let it out until I hit it the second time. In other words, you are paying attention because you have to listen for the second bell while you're having the intention of holding your breath. Does that make sense to you? Now, I'm going to hold it a bit longer than usual. So you're going to suffer a little bit. But we'll try it, shall we? Okay? So the first one is when you take the breath in. See, that was different from all the other states. I was just wondering, Susan, would you demonstrate how you do it with your children?
Sure. I'm wondering if anyone feels different in their body after that. I know I certainly do, even with those very brief breathing exercises. With young children, we have to be careful not to make it miserable for them. And also remember, it's very difficult for a lot of young children to sit still. So if you're accustomed to walking, how many people here are familiar with walking meditation? In walking meditation, there are three objects of occurrence: standing, lifting, and moving. So we basically do that while sitting down. And this is also, again, an executive function thing, really taking care of where your body is in place. So we'll have children move side by side. And if you look through, if you go on the internet and look at videos from a number of contemplative traditions, you'll see that there's an awful lot of rocking and swaying that people do during attentional training. And it's likely that there's some sense behind that. Now with little kids, even as young as 4, it's this simple. And again, it is intention. And there's a researcher out of UCLA, Jeffrey Schwartz, who was one of the first researchers who found something, or really identified something called self-directed neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the mind to change the brain. And what that really is dependent on is intention. So we can all hold our breath, but if we're not doing it with intentionality, it's not having the same effect on our brains. So here with young kids, the very easiest thing we do is we say, all right, we're going to hit the bell like this. We're going to listen as long as we can, and when the sound stops, you raise your hand. And this is little kids, 4 years old, so we listen, the sound stops, and we raise our hand. And then what we'll start to do is we'll start doing it in mime. And again, we'll get this side-to-side action going with them, because the moving side-by-side lets them build their capacity to sit still for longer periods of time. And so then we'll go tick-tock, like a clock. Remember, they're 4, until we find our center. Looking, there's generally a drum in the circle. So again, it's an intention on a sensory event. And then breathing, we feel our breathing. We don't think about our breathing, we feel about it. And then listening. And then when the sound stops, we raise our hand. So that's one of the ways we work with breath awareness, intentionality, and awareness of the 5 senses with children as young as 4.
We often like to wonder what's the utility of mindfulness training. So we've heard from the geriatrician I thought it's appropriate that we should listen to the child psychiatrist. Do they use this in their clinic? So I'm very glad to have at the back now a very eminent child psychiatrist, Professor John Wong. John, do you think it's useful for your clinics to see for patients, if say ADHD and all that?
Sorry, I'm John. I was trying to hide in one corner. I couldn't escape Prof. Kw's attention, so I'm moving my chairs, my seats. Anyway, I think that was a very interesting presentation. Thanks, Lynette and Susan. I apologize, I came in halfway through Susan's presentation. So I didn't really have a chance to understand the full nature of work. But I think with regards to what Prof. Kwa just raised, I think this is a very important area of work. But it's always very challenging, especially for preschool children and young children, for them to really participate in this kind of work. They need to be very psychologically minded and be attentive. I think that is one of the challenge that we have, because in the clinical setting, most of the cases that are referred to us usually do have attentional problems. And so I think this is really a big challenge for us to really get them to embark on this nature of work. But I think for those who are able to respond, I think this is one important area of therapy that I think at least among the clinicians here, I think we have not really ventured too much into it. And I think there's a lot of prospect.
Thanks, John. I was thinking also whether this kind of program can also reduce the anxiety of children here in Singapore, and in a way, in terms of long terms, whether it helps them to be more creative in doing things. I'm also mindful that last year there was an editorial in Newsweek written by the lead editor, Farid Zakaria, in which he compared children's results in Singapore and America. And in fact, he told the Minister of Education that the outcome of science and mathematics results is better in Singapore than America. But he wrote in the papers that in terms of long term, are they more creative? The American kids, although it didn't do well, they became more creative. Whereas the Singapore group has not been creative. I don't know whether you agree with that, Lynette.
Okay. I do not have any data to indicate. I can speak, I guess, maybe as a professor, having taught here maybe for a couple of years now, and the qualitative differences I see in, say, the U.S. college student, the average U.S. college student that I used to teach, and maybe the NUS student now, I think it reflects where they've come from, in that they're incredibly great. I mean, I used to struggle in my advanced, even graduate level classes at times with getting students to complete readings in a timely fashion so that they can participate in a classroom discussion. But there was no lack of creativity or independent thinking when it came time to complete a term paper, or if I get them in on time, they're always just, lots of innovative ideas. And some of the struggles I've had here with undergraduate and graduate students has been this other issue of I actually get everything paraphrased out of the textbook or readings that I've assigned, and they've sort of combined all of this information, and yet the best way to raise anxiety, I've realized, is to ask for a paper where they're asked for their own opinion about a particular disorder or clinical condition, given what I teach. It raises so much anxiety, and it created a lot of work for me because I had a lot of visits during my office hours. I realized because the question raised they were just very concerned that there was no reading to use for this particular question. And so I think, I don't know, I mean, again, it's just a small segment of the NUS population that I see, but that's...
Any other questions? Sure. Sure, take the microphone. Tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Chiang Wen Wei. I'm just invited here. I'm an interested parent. So a question to both Susan and Lynette, please. Susan, I'm just very interested. Do you have uncooperative children in your sessions? And how do you manage them? And for Lynette, because quality of life, to me, is a very subjective thing. And how do you benchmark it? You talk about children in Singapore, 2 hours recreation. What do they do in other parts of the world? I mean, how do you really measure quality of life?
Okay, Susan first.
Yes, I have uncooperative children in my classes, and how we manage them is, and it also relates a little to the attentional question. The attentional spectrum, we're looking at attention now more on a spectrum. And all children range on, sometimes on one side of the spectrum, or less regulated or more regulated, sometimes more on the less regulated more often. But with the work that we do, we really try to deal with the child who's in front of us now. And if the child is on the less regulated side of the spectrum, we don't push it. We don't want to make somebody miserable. But what we do is a lot of games and activities. So, for example, these kids who are have very difficult time regulating themselves, we'll do things where they're standing up, like mirroring games, where they're trying to get their hands as close as possible. So they don't really realize what they're doing is attending. They don't really realize they're practicing their skills in executive function. They think they're playing a game, and they actually are playing a game. And they're controlling their body, and they're building their capacity to self-regulate. But ultimately, if, classroom management is a challenge for everyone. And, for me, it's no exception. But generally speaking, most of the kids like it. And I find that if we can relate it to their lives, if we can explain to them how this is going to help them in a real life situation, even if it's going to if better attentional skills will help them play their basketball better, or it'll help them calm down when they're upset. The more we try to bring it back to something concrete and in real life as opposed to the abstract, the more luck we tend to have.
Okay, Lynette, a one-liner on QOL.
Okay, one liner. You're right, it is very subjective, which is why I think it reflects in the scores that even though you have the Straits Times data saying that kids only get 2 hours a week on average in Singapore to spend on recreation activities, and yet we have their ratings of QOL in our study being relatively high. And you're right, it is quite subjective. Maybe, I think if you took an average American child and told them they only had 2 hours a week to play, you might have a relatively different response than, say, a child who's here in Singapore. And so when we look at the data, we don't really look to say that Singaporean children have a higher or lower quality of life, but it's more their perception of their quality of life that we're interested in.
So usually in the World Health Study, we use a World Health QOL scale, which is standardized to all the nations of the world. So they're standardized WHO QOL questionnaires. So we have to come to an end. I know Shirley is signaling frantically at the back. People will get back to clinics. I want to thank all of you for coming. And we've heard a wonderful presentation by Ms. Susan Greenland on Mindful Awareness Program. And probably it could be used also in the clinical setting and for ADHD or Lynette's work in the cancer patients and the quality of life of cancer patients. Before I came here, I was talking to my colleagues about this talk, and he asked me, what about the quality of life of NUS professors? Well, that's another research. We have Joanne here from NTU. We can compare NTU and NUS. A good comparison. I want to thank the speakers once again and all of you for coming. Thank you very much.